Hello, my name is Nancy Snedden and I'm a moderator for today's webinar on using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. You can't see me, I'm just on audio, but you will be able to see our presenters today, that's David Brightwell and Tom Booth, in a few minutes. So while we're waiting for everyone to join us, if you'd just like to type hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, into the chat box, then we know that we've got people joining us. And we've got almost 400 people in the room already, which is fantastic. But I think there are some more people waiting to join. So if you'd just like to type hello, good morning, something like that, so we know that you're with us. And while you're doing that, I will just run through a few points to help you get the most out of today's webinar. First of all, just to get good quality audio and picture images. So first of all, for audio, if you have headphones, we recommend that you put them on. You'll get much clearer quality audio with headphones. And to get a good quality video, because the webinar is live streamed over the internet, it does take up quite a bit of bandwidth. So we recommend that you switch off anything on your computer that you're not using. It will help your internet connection to function much, much better if your computer hasn't got too many things to do at once. So switch off anything like Skype, for example, that you're not using, and that will help with clear quality pictures. If you have any problems with the sound or the picture, you can always try to reconnect. And there's a reconnect button at the bottom of your screen. Alternatively, you can refresh the browser on your page, but just click on the refresh icon at the top of the screen. Also, please do check that you have access to YouTube. That's really important. The webinar is streamed using YouTube, so it does need to be enabled on your computer and even the place where you're accessing the webinar from. Okay, so we've got over 400 people in the room now. Hello, everybody. That's great. While we're waiting for another couple of minutes for people to join us, I'll just run through those points again so that you can all get the most out of today's webinar. My name's Nancy Snedden. I'm a moderator today, so you can't see me. I'm just on audio. And I'm just going to run through a couple of points while we're waiting for more people to join us. So for good quality sound and pictures, if you can, put headphones on. And also, if you can switch off anything that you're not using on your computer, that will help to get good quality images on your screen. The webinar is live streamed over the internet, so your internet connection, if there are any problems with that, it's usually because you've got other things going on your computer. If you can switch off any programs that you don't need, that will help the connectivity. You'll get a better quality picture. And do check that you have access to YouTube. That's really important. Any problems with connection, any problems with sound, any problems with the image, you can always try to reconnect. The reconnect button is at the bottom of your screen, or you can try to refresh the browser. So just click on the refresh icon on your screen, and then that should sort out any problems that you've got. Okay, well, it's very, very nearly 3:30 UK time, so I'm going to officially welcome you to today's webinar on using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. My name is Nancy Snedden. I'm just on audio, so you can't see me. I'm a moderator for today's webinar. I'm here to introduce the webinar, show you how to use some of the tools on Webinar Jam. Then in a minute or two, I'm going to hand over to our presenters. That's David Brightwell and Tom Booth, and they're going to talk to you about using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. I'll come back at the end to talk again about some support material, and then we'll finish with a question and answer session. Okay, so for those of you who've just joined us, there's a few who've just joined the room. I'll just quickly run through a couple of points to help you get the most out of today's webinar. So first of all, to get really good quality audio and video, a few tips for you. If you can wear headphones, if you've got headphones, do put them on. You'll get clearer quality sound. And to get the best quality video and images on the webinar, if you can switch off any programs that you don't need on your computer, anything like Skype, for example, that will help with um, the, the, the webinar today. The webinar is live streamed. It takes up quite a bit of bandwidth, so your internet connection will work better if there's not too many things going on in the background on your computer. So switch off anything you don't need, and also do check that you have access to YouTube. That's really important. Okay, the webinar is recorded, so towards the end of the week we will send you an email with a link to a recording, and that means that you'll be able to watch it all again in your own time. So don't worry if you miss a bit, if you have to leave early, if anything's not clear, you can watch it all again in your own time later on in the week. We'll send you that in an email. You'll also get, with that email, you'll also get a certificate of attendance and a feedback form. Okay, so during the webinar, you'll need to use a couple of tools. The first one is the chat box, and I can see you're all using that perfectly because you're all saying hello, good morning, good afternoon, saying where you're from. That's fantastic. Use the chat box if you have any comments or questions about the webinar. If it's a question that we can answer straight away, we will type an answer to you in the chat box, but we will keep some questions for the question and answer session at the end. So don't worry if your question isn't answered straight away. We'll also ask you to use the chat box for a couple of for activities during the webinar. For example, we might ask you to type an answer to a question or type in an idea about something that the presenters are talking about. So we'll ask you to use the chat box during the webinar. Another tool that we're going to use during the webinar is a poll, like a multiple choice activity. So when we do that, we'll put a question on the screen and there'll be different options like A, B, C, D, etc. for you to choose from. And those options will appear under your chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. And the presenter will read them out and will ask you to choose one of them. The presenters will ask you to click on it rather than type your answer in the chat box, and then we'll get an idea of how many people are answering each of them. We'll get a poll, in other words. So let's just practice that now. We'd like to find out a little bit about who you are. So in a second or two, you will see 4 options appearing on your screen underneath your chat box. There are A, B, C, and D. So if you are a teacher, click on A. If you're a coordinator or director of studies, click on B. If you're a learner, click on C. And if you're a parent, click on D. So don't type it in the chat box. I can see some of you are typing in the chat box. Could you click on the letter instead in the poll? And then we'll get a much clearer idea of your answer. So click on a letter, just choose one of them, and then we'll see really a better idea of who you are. And it looks like most people have answered. So 91% of you are teachers. And we've got about 7 or 8% are coordinators, directors of studies, and 2% learners. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much for completing that poll. We'd also like to know where you are joining the webinar from. So the different countries. Well, that's really interesting to know. Thank you very much and welcome to all of you. So that's all from me to begin with. We're going to start the webinar now. So I'll hand over to our presenters for today, David Brightwell and Tom Booth.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everyone. I'm David Brightwell, and I'm a teacher trainer and writer on teaching and learning English.
And I'm Tom Booth, and I work on digital learning products at Cambridge English.
Welcome to today's webinar. It's good to be here with you. The topic of today's webinar is digital tools and how they can best be used to help you enrich your learners' vocabulary. So, here are some questions that we hope to address during today's webinar. We're going to start by defining vocabulary and talking about what learners need to know about it.
Then we'll look at what vocabulary learners need to know at different levels and how this relates to the different exams which Cambridge English Language Assessment offers. Then we'll focus on some digital tools that we think can help learners to focus on vocabulary and ways in which they can use the tools to personalise and memorise new words.
We'll also look at how digital tools can be used to encourage learners to work together on learning new words and to extend vocabulary learning to take place outside the classroom. And finally, we'll give you some tips and ideas about how to get started with digital tools.
We're aiming to encourage you to use digital tools, and if you have never used them before, we hope to give you some ideas about activities you can easily show your learners, particularly when focusing on vocabulary learning and development. We'll be asking you to take part in some polls and answer some questions as well. So, let's get started.
So, first of all, let's look at the title, Using Digital Tools to Enrich Your Learners' Vocabulary. What do we mean exactly by vocabulary? Well, at its simplest, vocabulary just means words, and of course, your learners need to learn as many individual words and expressions as quickly as possible in order to make themselves understood and to understand what they read or hear.
So now let's ask a slightly different question. What do learners actually need to know about vocabulary? What information do they need about the words they want to learn?
So what do you think learners need to know about vocabulary? Please share your ideas in the chat box. Here's the question again. What do you think learners need to know about vocabulary? So we have ideas coming through.
Yep.
Pronunciation, meaning,
context,
that's really important. Usage, collocation, spelling. Lots of really good ideas coming through. So you've mentioned ideas related to spelling, pronunciation, form, usage. Thanks for all of your answers.
Here are 6 general areas that we think learners need to be aware of and to think about, although at lower levels, not all of them might be so important. Firstly, what it means, the meaning. Then, how to say it, the pronunciation, and how to spell it, the spelling. The form of the word is also very important. When we talk about form with reference to vocabulary, this means what type of word it is. For example, is it a noun or a verb? Form can also include aspects such as irregular plurals or countable and uncountable nouns, and also potential issues like verbs and dependent prepositions such as listen to or depend on.
Another consideration is how the word is used, its usage. If words are often used together, for example, a tough question, we call this collocation. There may also be questions about the formality of a vocabulary item. For example, the verbs inquire and ask about have different levels of formality. Or even whether it has a negative or positive connotation. For example, tabloid newspapers. And finally, we can think about the frequency of a word, how common it is, and what level it should be learnt at.
At different levels, learners need to learn different types of vocabulary. But how do we know what vocabulary is appropriate at each level? Well, if your learners are preparing themselves for Cambridge English exams, you can look on the Resources for Teachers section of the Cambridge English website and find word lists for some of them.
Let's have a look at one of these word lists as an example. Here is the word list for Cambridge English Preliminary and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools. These are Cambridge English General English exams for adult and teenage learners at B1 level. We'll send you a link to this after the webinar.
The list is organised both alphabetically and according to topic. So if we look first at the alphabetical list, we can see that there are about 200 words under A, while under Z there are just 4: zebra, zero, zone and zoo. These are the recommended words for a learner preparing for Cambridge English Preliminary or Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools, and they are the words candidates are expected to understand and may have to know in order to answer a question in the exam. But the list is not a complete list of every word which might appear somewhere in the exam. And of course, learners shouldn't limit themselves to only learning these words.
The same words are also arranged by topic. So if, for example, we take the topic of the natural world, we see that the word list has about 50 words which the learners need to know. 3 of those words beginning with A, and there's one of those Z words again, zebra. It's also worth noting that many exam course books also base their vocabulary input on these word lists.
We'd now like to ask you a question. Have you ever used a word list to prepare learners for an exam? Please answer by voting yes or no now. Have you ever used a word list to prepare learners for an exam? So there's some answers coming in the poll very quickly. Wow.
It's about 50-50.
It's almost 50-50, isn't it? In fact, yes is winning.
Okay.
About 65 yes. Okay, interesting. So I guess most of you have used word list to prepare students for our exams. So remember that the word list is a really useful starting point, and it's well worth finding it on the Cambridge English website.
There are word lists for all of the Cambridge English exams at levels up to and including B1, including Cambridge English Business Preliminary, as well as the general English exams for adults and schools, and all of the exams for young learners, Cambridge English Starters, Movers and Flyers. The information about which words are necessary at which levels comes from corpus evidence, which Cambridge English Language Assessment collects and updates. This information relates to how often each word is used in real life. The higher the frequency a word is, the lower the level at which it might be tested in an exam.
Now, let's get you involved again. You can see 10 words. They're all words to do with learning or studying vocabulary. 7 of them are from the Cambridge English Starters word list, and 3 of them aren't. Don't forget, the Cambridge English Starters list is lower than A1, so the words on that list are really very basic words, which learners at a very low level need to know.
Have a look and pick out the 3 words that aren't at Cambridge English Starters level and type those 3 words into the chat box. Here's that question again. Which 3 words would not be found on the Cambridge English Starters word list? Word, memory, repetition, understand, tell, write, definition, read, teacher, talk. Answers are coming through. Most people are picking out repetition, definition, and memory. Most people are picking out those 3 words as the 3 words that are a higher level.
Great. Well done. You correctly spotted that these 3 words are not on the Cambridge English Starters list. But how can you find out what level they are?
Well, there are several options to find out the level of a word. But let's start by looking at this free online resource, the English Vocabulary Profile.
This is a great resource created in 2012 and based on research into vocabulary learning, which provides information about the words and phrases that are typically mastered by learners at 6 levels of the Common European Framework of References for Languages, the CEFR. It is a valuable tool for decision making around what vocabulary to teach students as they progress at different levels, and also how to assess them at different levels.
You can create a free account easily to sign into this resource. If you already have an account, open the home page and look up the word repetition. What level is it? Type your answer now. If you don't have an account, just guess what level you think the word repetition is and type it in the chat box now. What level do you think the word repetition is? Some answers coming through.
Mostly from A2 to B1, isn't it, at the moment?
Most people are saying that that word is B1, or some people saying B2.
Okay, interestingly, actually, the word repetition is actually at level C2, which is the level of Cambridge English proficiency. Of course, the verb repeat, meaning to say something again, comes in at a far lower level, A2 in fact, but the noun repetition is at C2. Also, don't forget that this is a guide based on a corpus of learners' use of vocabulary, and it doesn't mean that learners would never come across this word at a lower level. So, English Vocabulary Profile is one way to find out about the level of words. Another online resource that can help you is an online dictionary, such as the Cambridge Dictionary.
This contains information about word level 2. You don't need to sign up for this one. You can just use it right away. So let's have a go at using it. Let's look for the word memory. It's important to have a good memory if you want to enrich your vocabulary.
The word memory is interesting because it has more than one meaning. Firstly, it means the ability to remember. For example, I have a good memory, so I can learn words quickly. But it also has another related meaning, which is slightly different. It also means something which you remember from the past. For example, looking at old photographs can bring back a lot of memories. As you can see from the dictionary page, both of these meanings of the word are at B1 level.
But there's another meaning of the word, the memory of a computer. For example, my computer was expensive because it has a big memory. This meaning of the word, as you can see, is at A2, which means that learners usually know this meaning before the other meanings, which is noteworthy because this obviously was not the original meaning of the word. This demonstrates how it's worth using a dictionary to check exactly what level a word is at.
Now, let's remind ourselves of what learners need to know about a word. Let's look at the slide we saw earlier to remind you. An online dictionary can help learners with all these aspects of vocabulary, in fact. Firstly, learners have the pronunciation, both British and American versions. The computer will play an audio recording of the pronunciation when you click on the speaker symbol.
Then there are some common collocations: a good memory, a loss of memory, to bring back memories, and so on. And there are also some common idioms which include the word memory. For example, take a stroll, trip, or walk down memory lane. In addition, learners can also read more examples of each meaning of the word and open the thesaurus function, which gives them synonyms and other related words.
Now, let's get some more feedback from you about online dictionaries. What do you find most useful about online dictionaries? Just write a few words in the chat box. What do you find most useful as a teacher? about using online dictionaries. Some people are already saying they're fast and they're convenient, they're at hand.
It's very easy to search for words in the online dictionary. Lots of good ideas coming through. It's very easy to access, it's available, fast to use, helps you with the pronunciation, practical. A lot of people are mentioning that it's quicker.
Great.
Generally, it would be quicker to look things up on an online dictionary than in a paper dictionary. So that's true.
So there are lots of advantages, and you can use an online dictionary to prepare for your lessons or to help you to analyse vocabulary in order to prepare for questions that your learners might ask you in class, and also to check whether the vocabulary is at the right level for your class or not. You can also prepare pre-reading or pre-listening activities with vocabulary at suitable levels, especially checking words in English Vocabulary Profile, so that you can decide if words in a text need to be learned just for recognition or also for production.
Teachers and learners can also use an online dictionary in lessons to encourage learners to use them outside class. You can show the page on an interactive whiteboard or as a slide on a projector screen so that the whole class can see the relevant information and or hear the pronunciation of a word or phrase.
Learners can also use an online dictionary independently in class on their phone or tablets in carefully structured tasks. So not, for example, for just looking up every word when they're reading something, but rather, for example, as a vocabulary extension task for quick finishes. For example, they could be asked to look up 5 words and make flashcards or quiz questions to test their partner. And also, learners could have a vocabulary list and 5 minutes to learn and remember as many words as possible before doing a team game, like noughts and crosses or blockbusters on the whiteboard.
So, using online dictionaries is one way of helping learners focus on vocabulary. But there are other digital tools that can also be very useful. And we're going to look at another one now. This is a digital tool called Quizlet. Let's see how learners can use it to help them remember vocabulary. Quizlet is a well-known digital tool. It's been around for about 10 years and it's popular with different kinds of learners. There are lots of other great digital tools out there too, but this one is probably a good place to start if you're new to digital tools.
Now, have a look at this set of words. They're really low-level words, and all of them are from the Cambridge English Starters word list. We'll look at using some other digital tools for learning higher-level vocabulary later, but let's focus on this for now. Here we have 10 words, all names of colours. Not difficult? Well, let's think about what might be difficult about these words. So, let's go back to our checklist. Meaning, pronunciation, spelling, form, usage, and frequency. Well, regarding meaning, this is pretty straightforward. There may be differences in how individuals describe or perceive colours, but overall we can imagine that most learners will understand the meanings of these words by showing them a picture of the colour. But let's think about pronunciation and spelling.
Here are the words in our set again. Have a look at them. This is an example of a simple set of words about one topic, and we're going to be using these words with Quizlet. Let's think about spelling. Which word do you think is going to present the most problems with spelling for your learners? Type that word in the box now. Look at these words. Think about which word is going to be the most difficult for your learners to spell, and type that word into the box now. We have some answers coming through. Most people are picking purple. Why do you think that would be difficult to spell, Tom?
I guess purple has the sound, doesn't it? And the English sound has a few different ways to spell it.
Yeah, that's right. Do you think that it would also depend on what the student's first language is?
I guess it may well do, yes. Yeah. So once the learners are confident with the meaning and the pronunciation and the spelling, A great way to get learners actively learning this vocabulary is to use flashcards. There are plenty of digital flashcards available. You can search for one in your browser or your app store, but we're going to look at Quizlet to see how we can help learners with the 10 words on our list. First of all, the teacher will need a Quizlet account. To sign up for it, you just need to provide an email address and a password. Then, search for a vocabulary set called YLE Starters-Colours. YLE Starters Colours. This set has been produced by Cambridge English Language Assessment. The words and visuals are from the Cambridge English Starters word list. When you've found it, you have a choice of activities which learners can do to help them practice the words, and the most basic activity is the flashcards. You do need to remember that when searching for content, you should be careful of the source. Check the content thoroughly and ensure that if learners are searching, they know what to do if they see anything inappropriate or upsetting. For example, cover or turn off the screen immediately, or if they're in class, ask the teacher for assistance. You can give learners the exact URL of your trusted set to avoid these kinds of issues. These flashcards are a digital version of old-fashioned paper flashcards, where you have the word on one side and the meaning on the other. On these digital flashcards, you have an audio element too. If you click the audio button, the computer produces the sound of the word. So this helps the learner with the pronunciation as they can hear the word or phrase.
Digital flashcard tools usually have a range of things you can do to practice. For example, here in Quizlet, you can do an activity called Learn, where the learner sees a picture of the word, then has to type in the word itself. And another option is a spelling activity. Here, the computer produces the audio of the word, the learner types the word, and if the spelling is incorrect, the computer highlights the error in red and then requires the learner to correct the spelling themselves. So these three activities all help the learner with the meaning, the spelling, and the pronunciation of the words.
Digital flashcard tools often have games that you can use to practice the words and phrases in a set. Here in Quizlet, you can see that there are several other activities which the learner can also use to work on this kind of vocabulary. There's a matching game where they match cards as quickly as possible, and there's a kind of video arcade game where learners have to type the words quickly to stop their planet being destroyed.
At the moment, we've only looked at using a flashcard tool such as Quizlet on a computer to practice this kind of vocabulary in class. But digital flashcard tools often provide a mobile app too, and here you can see the Quizlet mobile app. So learners can access it via a smartphone or tablet. The same set of vocabulary and most of the same activities are available for them to practice that way too. So, we've seen how this kind of digital flashcard tool can be used to present and practice vocabulary. Let's move on to talk about how digital tools can help learners to personalize and memorize words.
Let's start by defining what we mean. Here, by personalize, we mean make the vocabulary relevant and personal to the learner by helping them to create their own connection to it. This in turn helps to make the vocabulary more memorable to the learner, which in turn makes it easier for the learner to memorize it.
As you know, there's a big difference between a learner's passive vocabulary, which is the total set of words they can recognize and understand, and their active vocabulary, which is the set of words they can use effectively in speaking and writing. While there is always going to be a gap between these two, by memorizing more and more vocabulary, the learner begins to be able to use more and more of it, and gradually their active vocabulary grows. So, how can digital tools help learners personalize and memorize vocabulary? Well, in terms of personalization, the most obvious way that learners can help themselves is by providing translations of words instead of definitions in English.
Another way, avoiding the use of translation, is to create a personalized definition or choose a picture that has some relevance for the individual, or provide an example of the word in a context that is meaningful to the individual learner.
So, using a digital flashcard tool, it's easy enough to make cards using these translations or personalized definitions instead. As you can see here, the learner can just take the original set of words and change the definitions originally provided to something more personal to them. In this example, the student has thought of a personal context for the word clueless.
As an alternative, the teacher can provide the list of words without any definitions and allow the learner to find their own way to remember the meaning which suits them best. It's easy to do, and then the student has their own digital reference for this vocabulary. Alternatively, the student can find pictures which mean something to them personally and make a set of cards using these pictures for definitions. Okay, so let's look at what we can do with digital tools to help learners memorize vocabulary.
This great digital tool is called Memrise, and it focuses, as the name might suggest, on memorization. It uses a really well-researched technique called spaced repetition. The idea is that in order to memorize something, you need to keep being exposed to it over and over again at increasing intervals. Memrise uses this idea and allows learners to practice the vocabulary over and over again on their mobile devices.
Let's have a look at how you can get started with Memrise. Again, like many digital tools, you have to create an account, so you'll need an email address and a password. In a minute, we'll show you how you can create your own word sets, but let's start by showing you how Memrise works with a set we have already made.
Let's look at a Memrise set. We're going to use a set of words about travel and transport. All of the words in the set are taken from the Cambridge English Preliminary and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools word list, which we saw earlier in this webinar. Here are the words in the set. Have a look at them. They're all to do with travel and transport. Think about how you would write short definitions of these words.
We've turned this set of words into a set on Memrise to share with B1 learners. If you were doing this vocabulary with your class, you could share this set either by social media or by creating a Memrise study group and sharing it with them in that way. Once we've shared the vocabulary set with our learners, they can start using the Memrise tool to begin to memorize it. Again, they can do this using the computer, but Memrise really works best once students begin to access the vocabulary activities via their smartphones.
What makes this tool really effective is that it allows learners to set themselves daily goals. It also sends the user reminders to practice more, and it remembers which vocabulary items the learner is finding the most difficult and includes those items in reviewing sessions. There are also audio prompts to help with pronunciation and games activities too, to make the learning more memorable and fun. All this helps the learner to memorize the new vocabulary much more quickly. As we mentioned earlier with Quizlet, it's important here too to check the content thoroughly and ensure that if learners are searching, they know to notify you immediately if they see anything inappropriate or upsetting, and to turn off the screen straight away. Learners must be at least 13 to have their own account with Memrise.
In these slides, you can see some of these activities being used on a smartphone. So, we've seen how you can use Memrise to practice a vocabulary set which has already been created on the digital tool, but it's also possible, and this is where you may be able to use this tool to the best effect with your learners, to create your own course.
Let's see how that works. Last time, we just looked at a small set of words, but this time we'll create a larger set. Instead of a small set of words on a topic, let's imagine that you have a larger set of words. For example, the vocabulary list from one unit of a course book you are using. Most course books list the vocabulary in each unit at the back of the book or on the book's website. Some books even supply the word list as a spreadsheet, which you can download. Check on your coursebook website if your book does this.
So we click Create a Course, then we give the course a name. We're calling this course Unit 1, as we're going to be accessing the vocabulary from Unit 1 of our coursebook. And we'll put that it's an English course for English speakers. We could change this to make it an English course for speakers of a particular language, which may be better for you if you're teaching monolingual classes. We'll come back to why you might want to do that in a moment.
Now we have to start adding the words. We could do this by manually adding them one at a time. We can invite the students to do this too by clicking on Contributors. We can invite other students to edit the word list, but remember that they can only do that if they are 13 years old or above. We can also see other definitions and translations for this word. These have been taken from other courses on Memrise where this word appears. That's why the safety aspect is really important when you're doing this. It's even possible, and this is where you might be able to provide your learners with plenty of extra practice with the vocabulary in their coursebook, to import large sets of vocabulary from spreadsheets or databases. This could be really useful if you're using a coursebook which has a word list available as a spreadsheet. It's easy to copy and paste the words and the definitions from the spreadsheet into the Memrise course. Just click Advanced and then Bulk Add and follow the instructions. This is a quick way to make a vocabulary course from the word list of the whole book. Many coursebooks now have an accompanying word list spreadsheet like this, making it really easy to turn the course vocabulary into a Memrise course. With some coursebooks, it's also possible to download the same word list with particular language translations of the list. So, instead of English definitions of the words, we can download, for example, French translations instead. And then we can use these translations in the Memrise activity instead of definitions in English. Many course books provide definitions in other languages, including Russian, German, and so on.
Let's move on now to talk about the benefits of collaborating in language learning and vocabulary learning. Well, you'll probably agree that it's motivating for students and it helps create better working relationships in the classroom. It can also make learning quicker, as it encourages learners to teach one another, and it takes some of the pressure away from the teacher. All in all, as we all know, encouraging cooperation and collaboration between learners is really useful. So, how about using digital tools to help learners collaborate?
Well, as we've already seen, there are lots of opportunities for getting learners to share the vocabulary sets they've made in digital tools such as Quizlet or Memrise. And most other digital tools encourage sharing of resources too. The teacher can encourage the students to share their materials with one another by creating study groups within the digital tool or using social media links to get students to share their materials with each other. There are also lots of other really useful digital tools designed to aid collaborative learning.
There are many digital tools available which can help us to create interactive activities for learners and to provide opportunities for collaboration between learners. Let's look at an example called WordWall.
This is a great tool which is very easy to use. Again, the teacher just needs an email address and a password to sign up. Once the teacher has signed up, it's easy to make fun activities which can encourage cooperation between students in the classroom. In this activity, the teacher has produced an online quiz to practice the students' knowledge of adjectives describing feelings. The teacher puts the picture and 6 options on the smartboard. Then, using a code presented to the learners via the smartboard, the learners use their smartphones to log into the quiz. The learners work in groups to race one another to answer the questions in the quiz.
These kinds of activities are available in many digital tools and can make for really fun collaborative classroom activities which are great for getting students working together.
But digital tools are also great for getting students working together outside the classroom too. Let's look at another well-established digital tool called Padlet. This is one of a series of different tools that can be used for creating shared online workboards. Padlet is really easy to use. You don't even need to sign up, though you will get more features if you do. But let's just start by showing you the basics without starting up. So we go to padlet.com and we click on For School. Then make a Padlet. This brings up a workspace like a whiteboard. You need to give it a name. We're going to use it to work on vocabulary about environmental problems. So we'll call this Padlet Environmental Problems. Now you need to share the board space with your learners. This is where the collaboration comes in. There are many ways to share the space. You can share it via an email or social media link, or even just get the students to scan the QR code from their tablets or smartphones. This gives all the students access to read and write on the board. They can do it in class or outside the classroom. It's like all the students writing on one wall at the same time. Now you can use the shared space to work on collaborating on vocabulary. For example, in this activity, you can create a Padlet space and ask each student in the class to identify one environmental issue in their country and post a picture of it on the board. This is a kind of group brainstorming session where the students are all providing information and putting it on the board. Collaborative activities like this can allow teachers to encourage students to work together and can make the group learning experience much more enjoyable. So, using digital tools inside or outside the classroom, what are the issues? And how can digital tools help to build a bridge between the learning of vocabulary inside and outside the classroom? Here's a general framework for how you can combine in-class and out-of-class activities using digital tools. For example, using an activity like the last one we have just looked at using Padlet.
Step 1. The teacher introduces the topic, in this case, environmental problems. Step 2. In the class, the teacher shows the learners how to post to the Padlet page and makes sure they're familiar with how to use the digital tool and any safety features they should know about. Step 3. The students are asked to do some work using the digital tool out of the classroom. In this case, finding photos about environmental problems and researching vocabulary related to the topic.
Step 4. Students are asked to collaborate out of class by posting to the Padlet wall and commenting on other learners' posts in their free time as a homework task. Step 5. The teacher gives feedback on the activity in class. Step 6. The teacher saves the Padlet, which becomes a useful resource for future lessons and recycling.
So, hopefully, we've given you some ideas about digital tools for vocabulary learning. But how can you get started with digital tools? And how can you know if they're really working?
Well, getting started may take a little bit of courage if you haven't used any tools like this before. But if you keep it very simple to start with, you are unlikely to make mistakes. Don't try anything too difficult, and make sure that you have practiced using the tool yourself a few times before you use it with the learners. It's important that you learn how to support your teaching through technology, but that you don't allow the technology to dominate too much. A lesson which relies entirely on technology may seem too impersonal and may not appeal to all students' learning styles. Don't try to use technology in more than 1/4 of the time you spend in class.
Digital tools are commercial products. They're all available to use for free. However, Some of them may charge a subscription to access all of their features or functions. You may choose to subscribe if you find one tool very useful, but don't pay for subscriptions you won't use. We advise you to try using the free content first and only move up to a paid subscription if you are sure you're going to use it. And we wouldn't advise that you ask your students to sign up for anything they will have to pay for, although many learners may make their own decision to pay for a premium service with one or more of the digital tools. You can reduce the amount of time you spend preparing materials to use with your learners by getting them to make the materials themselves. Once you've trained your learners how to use particular digital tools for learning vocabulary, you can encourage students to make their own digital vocabulary sets and share them with one another.
All teachers who have ever used technology in class have experienced some problems with it. Even if your classroom is really well resourced, you may find that some technical problems may have an impact on your lesson. A particular problem with activities or tools which use the students' smartphones is the problem of access to the internet in the classroom. If students connect to the internet via a mobile network, it may be slow or expensive.
On the other hand, using the school Wi-Fi may also present problems, as too many students in one room trying to access it at the same time may overload it. Also, many of the digital tools you may find for vocabulary learning may have different functionality online and offline, and may only work fully when students are connected to the internet. And don't forget that students may not always have good access to the internet outside the classroom, so be aware of whether an activity you set requires internet access and how you can adapt an activity if necessary.
Get feedback from the students. Ask them if they find the tools useful. Find out how and when they are using them. Most digital tools will also allow you to easily track how often they're being used. Make sure that you are providing the learners with the assistance that they need. Ask your students which tools they like best and see how you can help them to use them. There are lots of options and opportunities out there just waiting to be discovered. So, good luck getting started with digital tools for learning and teaching vocabulary. We've now come to the end of the main webinar, and in a moment we will answer any further questions you may have about today's session. Please type your questions into the chat box. Before that, Nancy is going to show you how to find some additional resources to support you and your learners.
Thank you very much, David and Tom. That was a really interesting webinar. This is Nancy again. I'm just on audio, so you can't see me. While I'm talking, David and Tom are going to look through the questions that you've already sent in, and we have got a few for them to answer, but I expect there will be lots more questions that you have that you want to ask. So just type them into the chat box now, and then while I'm talking, they'll have a look at the questions and they'll answer as many as they can. Let me just remind you that you will get an email after this webinar, probably towards the end of the week. You'll get a link to a recording of the webinar. So if you had any problems with the sound or the picture, or if you had to leave early, for example, don't worry, you'll be able to see the whole thing again. You'll get the slides, you'll get the audio, you'll get the whole webinar again, which you can watch in your own time. You'll also get a certificate of attendance and a feedback form. That'll be in the same email. So I'm now going to just talk through a few resources which you and your learners might find useful. The first resource is the Cambridge Dictionary. It's used by nearly 20 million people around the world each month, and that includes learners, teachers, and native speakers. So it's very popular. It's also free. And it's easy to use. You can also use it on a mobile, so you can use it on whichever device you're using. You can personalise it to create your own word lists, quizzes. You can also view the interface in another language if you want to, and you can interact with other users on Facebook and Twitter. There are new words added to the dictionary on a regular basis, and there's also a blog on topical articles, and there's a word of the day feature, which is quite interesting to look at. So there's lots to explore on Cambridge Dictionary. The next resource we've got for you is called Word Fun World, and this is for learners who are preparing for the Cambridge English Young Learners tests. So that's starters, movers and flyers. So your learners on this site, they can play games to practice and learn key vocabulary. Then there are lots of features like a picture dictionary, hearing words as you play games, matching pictures to words, and playing against the clock. So take a look at that if you have young learners that you're preparing for. The next resource is the Digital Teacher, and this is a free professional development website. It's to help language teachers develop their digital skills. And on this site, you can find out about the Cambridge English Digital Framework. And this has been developed in consultation with practicing language teachers and trainers. And it describes key competencies for teaching effectively with technology. The framework has got 6 categories or levels, and you can test yourself to identify which level you're at. And then you can decide how you would like to develop your digital skills. And there's all sorts of help on this site for doing that. There's bite-sized training material. There are practical tips. There are ready-to-use lesson plans, reviews of digital learning products, and also blogs as well about using technology in the classroom. So again, there's lots to explore on this site when you've got a chance to have a look at it. Next up, we've got Teaching English. This is an online resource. It's on the Cambridge English website. You can find free resources for teachers, information about teaching qualifications, information about the Cambridge English Teaching Framework, and more webinars as well. You can also sign up for a newsletter if you want to on this site, and this will give you free updates and articles. Okay, well, that's it from me. I'm going to hand you back now to David and Tom, who they've got about 8 minutes to answer as many of your questions as they can fit in. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. Let's now answer questions that have been suggested by some of you. David, could you take the first one?
Thank you, Tom. We've had lots and lots of questions, and we haven't got time to answer them all, but we're going to pick out and try and answer as many as we can. Elham has asked, are these apps suitable for adult learners? And the answer to that, I would say, is absolutely. I don't think that you should assume that the adult learner doesn't know how to, doesn't want to use their smartphone or their tablet to help them with their learning. And I think that all of them are absolutely suitable. And don't forget that many of the tools, you can't open an account if you're at least 13. So most of them, I would say, are perfect for adult learners and designed to be used by adults. So absolutely, yes. Got lots of other interesting questions. Hasina has asked, do we have any such programs for ESP students? Well, the best thing about these digital tools is that they're not specifying what content they can be used for. You can use them for whatever content you feel is most appropriate. So if you're teaching a particular ESP area of English or a particular professional type of English, then you can certainly use these tools to practice learning the vocabulary that's relevant to that professional area. Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason at all why they couldn't be used for that. Marina has asked, can digital tools be used offline? The key thing to remember here is that all of these tools require some kind of connection to the internet, at least to start with. You can't really sign up to any of these resources or digital tools without signing up, without having access to the internet. But most of them are designed to work. At least some of the functionality will work if you're not connected to the internet. So something like a digital flashcard tool is perfect because you can create the flashcards when you're online, but then you can use them for practice when you're not online. So for example, when you're traveling on the bus or the train or so on and you don't have good internet access, some of the functions will still work. So they maximize the amount of time that you can spend learning and make the most of opportunities for learning when you wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity. So yes and no, they do work offline, but not everything that the tool will do will work offline. We've got lots of other really interesting questions. Natalia has asked, what would you say to teachers that are still reluctant to include digital tools in their classrooms? Well, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to be reluctant about. There's lots of reasons why teachers are reluctant to use technology in the classroom generally. They might be afraid that it doesn't work properly, or that they don't know enough about how to use it, or that the students won't like it. And what I would say, if you're nervous about getting started, is start with something really simple. Don't try to do too much at once, because there is a possibility that if you try to reach too far, you might have a few problems. Try something very simple, something which isn't going to take up a lot of time in the lesson, and something which the students should easily be able to achieve. And then I think you'll find that you get used to it, and that you want to use it and include it more and more in your own teaching. Tom, could you take some questions?
Yeah, there's so many. I'll try and get through a few of them. There's a really interesting question that a couple of people asked. I think it was David and also Nigusi, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, asking about the research behind some of these tools. So I can say a little bit about the research behind the English vocabulary profile, which we talked about earlier. That is compiled and produced through a whole raft of research into what level learners use particular words, use different words, and can understand different words. One way it was compiled was using the Cambridge Learner Corpus. And a corpus, as you may know, is a big database of language. There are lots of corpora out there of different types of language. And the Cambridge Learner Corpus is a corpus of language learners' use of English. And that was one way that the English vocabulary profile was compiled, but also they used a lot of other sources as well, like course books and other contexts, to try to understand at what level learners can recognise and use different words. So there's a lot of research behind that tool. Regarding the other tools, I'm not quite so sure about the research. What I would recommend is we've just launched a brand new website a couple of weeks ago called Teach with Digital, Cambridge English Teach with, sorry, beg your pardon, The Digital Teacher. So I got that wrong, sorry. The Digital Teacher, a brand new Cambridge English website called The Digital Teacher. And one of the things that's going to be on the Digital Teacher site is reviews of new digital tools. Our research department, we've got a big research department at Cambridge English, and they're doing a lot of research into pedagogy and how digital tools can help language learning. And a lot of information about that will appear on our new website, The Digital Teacher. Another question I got was from Katia, who's asking about analysing the level of words in texts. And there is. If you go to, there's a thing called Text Inspector. And I think the best way to find that is if you go to the English profile site and search for it, or if you just Google Text Inspector. It's based on the English vocabulary profile, and how it works is that you can type or paste a text into Text Inspector, and it just labels all the words according to what level they are on the CEFR. It's a really useful tool for using text in the class. I have time for one or two more. I had another question from David, who's asking about tools which allow students to see the same words in different contexts. I know exactly what you mean, because I've learned languages before where I've tried to find the word, I've tried to memorize the word using an app on my phone, and I get quite good at using it on my phone, and then I can't use it at all in any other context. So sometimes memorizing a word over and over again on an app doesn't always transfer to using it in a different context. And I think the best advice there is to encourage learners to get out there and engage and use English in as many different ways as possible. And that's how they find the words, that's how they meet the words. And then the digital tools are mainly used as a way to recycle and remember the words, a bit like a fancy version of a notebook. But one other tool we didn't mention today, which could be relevant, is something called it's called Lingually. Lingually is something you can get it as a plugin for your browser. And how it works is, it's probably more useful for higher level learners, but how it works is when you're reading a text online and you come across a new word, you can just tap it and it actually saves the word in the context. So it uses the context in which you find the word as the prompt. So rather than translating to remember you're remembering new words based on the context in which you found it. That could be quite a useful tool to add to your range of tools that you use. So
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. We had so many great questions. I'm sorry I haven't had time to answer them all, because there are lots of really interesting questions that we would like to have discussed. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for attending today. We hope that you found it useful. We look forward to seeing you again at our future webinars. The next webinar coming up is on using digital tools to improve writing, and that's on the 8th and the 10th of May. Thank you.
Thank you.